K.T.E. Put it all together, and what do you get? A wrestling podcast unlike any other. And today, we ask you the question, what one wrestler, what one superstar are you backing at WrestleMania? We posed the question last week for the past and the present. Connor, this year, we have plenty of matches that are taking shape. But over the years, what one wrestler, what one superstar over the years could you say that you definitively backed no matter what?
The one that the one that comes to mind is Batista 2005. He was in Evolution, and he's not supposed to go after Triple H. He's supposed to go after JBL, set up a triple threat with Cena and JBL. The famous Monday Night thumbs down, powerbomb through the table, and then just cemented himself as one of the top baby faces in the WWE, and then goes on to beat Triple H not once, not twice, but 3 times, and that's like hard to do. And so I think Batista 2005 was the one I'm going with.
Great series of matches, and we talk about moments that are etched in WWE history.
Yep. And just that moment, he just like, oh yeah, I've got the SmackDown. He goes, no. It's like,
and what's cool about that is that became a character moment and staple in Batista's character.
Yep. Because
if you notice, every time he does the Batista bomb from that point onward, it's the ropes thing, but he also goes,
yeah, and then So I think that one's one of my favorites. There's also others down there, like in the past. You got Randy Orton 2009. You got to back that up. He was the top heel at the moment, but I like the Batista one. That's one of my favorites.
Now you mentioned the Randy Orton one. For that one, were you behind him at that point?
I was, because I like the heel. I like the heel Randy. Randy's always been one of my favorites. Whether we like him or not, he's always been one of my favorites. But just knowing the fact that he went psychosomatic and was like, Triple H, if you use a sledgehammer and beat my ass at Mania, I'm champion. It's like, okay, that's cool. Like he's maneuvering the rules around to make it himself win. But obviously Triple H composed himself. But yeah, that
won the match. Yeah. I would say at that point I was super invested into it. I can't say that I was backing Orton. It was more so, wow, this dude's crazy. I'm so invested in the storyline.
Yeah. I was hoping he would have won because, like I said before, back in the day, it was always normally you got the repetitive winner of the Rumble wins main event.
Mm.
You didn't have that in 2009. You didn't have that in 2008. I think that's kind of the first time the Royal Rumble's winners didn't win. It was kind of like, oh, so they can lose at WrestleMania. So I was backing for Randy just because it was the momentum. Like, all right, Randy won. That's cool. But he's the character he was in at that moment. You couldn't beat that. So that's why I chose that's why I think Randy also. But like I said, there's so many others. I mean,
I'm glad that you said Randy Orton too, because when I posed the question last week, I even said a road to WrestleMania that you were invested in, no matter if anybody else was. I bet I was probably the only person that was invested into. I don't know if you remember in 2014 when Seth Rollins and the Authority turned on Randy Orton, and he came back that February, March, that Fastlane pay-per-view, came back and attacked Rollins, RKO'd him. I was invested in that Seth Rollins Randy Orton feud because it was neck and neck for basically who was the face of WWE,
right.
the pseudo face of WWE, because you had the chosen boy in Randy Orton and then the future with Rollins, and through the course of their Authority storyline, Seth Rollins became the new golden boy.
Right. And you also have to look at Randy of 2017 against Bray. He was in the Wyatt family, and then like we already had Lesnar Goldberg for the Universal title, so I was like, oh, Randy has to go after Bray, like, so, and then he kind of lit the house on fire, and
that could have been interesting. I'm glad that it turned into that storyline. I'm glad it turned into Randy versus Orton, Or, sorry, yeah, Randy versus
I
Orton.
mean, Randy versus Orton, huh?
It turned into Orton versus Wyatt. I'm glad that it turned in because it made sense as far as the storyline going forward. But it would have been very interesting to have something like Orton versus Styles
Yeah.
for that Mania feud. Granted, Shane McMahon versus AJ Styles was a really fun match. Better than I think any of us gave it credit for
Yep.
going into the show. But if you had Randy Orton versus AJ Styles for the WWE Championship, that's kind of interesting.
Oh, yeah, because AJ Styles is a TNA guy, he's not supposed to be the face of WWE. But here in that moment, within the short time he was in WWE, he was the face of WWE. So,
Right, because Styles had already had his interactions with Cena prior that year before and at the Rumble. So you go from one face of WWE to the next would be interesting because they ran it back in WrestleMania 2019.
yeah.
I believe. So they had to wait another whole 2 years to get that title program going on.
Yeah.
But as much as I enjoyed that, and I was probably the only one who enjoyed Randy Orton winning that Royal Rumble because he's one of my guys, I was invested a little bit more into that 2015 feud because there was that personal animosity there. And
Between the two.
yeah, and plus it led to one of the most famous RKOs of all time.
One of the greatest RKOs, man. Yeah. Like, you can't beat that. I mean, he's had some good ones, don't get me wrong, but that one, he launches him in the air. He's like, oh, hey, look, you're falling down. RKO. It's like, where'd that come from?
I love it because I think they had talked about doing that spot all week, and you can tell that they weren't sure that it was going to succeed because afterwards Randy was like, yes, let's go.
And the fact that it worked.
Yeah, he was celebrating a little too much. If you notice, the referee had to kind of go next to him and go, hey,
Yeah, it's like, cover. Like, come on. Like, match's over. Come on.
If you talk to Elijah, he would say the Evan Bourne airborne RKO.
Yeah,
He would say that.
That one's pretty cool.
One of his favorite, though, and I was there personally for when that happened, he was, and this is what I alluded to last week, he was a big fan of Zack Ryder back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, now he's on the Indies Independent. But when he was inserted into that WrestleMania 32 IC ladder match last minute, he was like, oh, man, this is his chance. This is his chance. And I remember telling him, I said, he's not going to win. The dude's barely on TV. He never has any matches. And I remember his comparison to this day. He said, well, yeah, Brock Lesnar barely shows up. he barely has any matches. I said, that's different. He's the biggest star in the company. He can do that.
Yeah, he has the right to do that if he wants to. But, yeah, that one was a super shock. But then I didn't like what they did the next day.
Have him immediately lose it.
Like, it made no sense. Give him like a month title reign. He was kind of hot at the moment. Just let him have the month title reign, and then him and Miz go at it at Extreme Rules or whatever the next pay-per-view was.
It was Extreme Rules, which that's another whole conversation because I think having Ryder lose it the next night isn't a terrible decision because if you're going to have him win it back, that's great heel heat on The Miz. He takes it from Ryder after his big WrestleMania moment. And then Ryder can go back and win it and get his retribution. Yeah. And then he can go on to have a second reign and a little bit longer. But it turned into Miz's great 2016 run.
Yeah. And Miz has always been a great mid-card guy. He's had a couple world title wins, but the main card scene for Miz, he knocks it out of the park. And that's why he's one of the best in the business. You got 2016, and then you got, 2017 with the IC title, or was it 2018?
I would say the stretch of 2016 up until the beginning of 2018 when he lost to Rollins at Mania. I would say that stretch from The Miz is some of his best mid-card work. And that's saying something because he's had plenty of great mid-card work over the span of his career. But when he was putting on good matches, had great character work,
had good storylines, too.
Good storylines and good opponents to face. That's where you got, personally, one of my favorite matches ever, and this is saying something, that Fatal 4-Way match at Extreme Rules from Zayn, Owens, Cesaro, and Miz.
Yeah.
Personally, one of my favorite mid-card matches ever.
Which, WrestleMania, mid-card, Intercontinental title, Fatal 4-Way? Maybe. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
But, another one that I would say, superstars that I was completely invested into, because Elijah has got his Zack Ryder. I've got my Randy Orton, but big Rey Mysterio guy too. And I remember my very first memory of being invested into a WrestleMania was Rey Mysterio's Royal Rumble win. So from his Royal Rumble win to his world title feud with Orton and Angle there at the pay-per-view, I remember that, and I remember being so invested to the point where I was like, "No, Rey, please."
He's not gonna win. Oh no.
And I think that right there is what built up my respect for Orton, just because of how devilish he could be. Because if you remember the heel work that he was doing in that feud, where he was telling Ray, he said, I don't think Eddie's up there. No, I think Eddie's down there.
Yeah.
And saying that to his face.
Oof. Yeah, that was a solid Royal Rumble winner right there. I think it's just the underdog story, and obviously, like, Eddie just had passed not long before, so
Right.
you kind of have to do something in memory of him, and Ray pulled it off fantastic. That's the one thing I respect about Ray, and he did it for Eddie. And yeah, WWE let him do that, and I prop WWE for that, because in that moment, they didn't have to do anything for Eddie.
Right.
They didn't have to do anything. They didn't owe Eddie anything. But for them to do that and say, "Hey, Ray, your storyline is going to be you're doing this for Eddie. You're winning the Royal Rumble," and then he goes on, wins at Mania 22. But
just makes you wonder, A, if Eddie had stayed around a little bit longer, how much bigger could his star have gotten from that point? Because you could think maybe that could have been Eddie winning the Royal Rumble. Who knows? But also at the same time, how big Rey Mysterio's star could have been with Eddie still around.
yeah,
That makes me think, because Rey Mysterio at that point is fighting for two people.
right.
And he became a bigger star not only because of Eddie's death, but because of the Rumble win, because of the world title win. It made everyone think of Rey Mysterio as, well, this is the top guy and one of the best luchadors of all time, to the point where nobody's replaced him up to this point in time, and it's been over 20 years.
It's true. They've tried.
Yeah, they've tried multiple times.
Tried. I don't know, Sin Cara.
Yeah. But with that said, it makes me wonder how much would have Eddie been in the world title scene? How much would he have produced in main event matches?
You always play the what if factor, and I know it's probably like a super controversial thing to talk about, but Chris Benoit, man, that guy was gonna go win the ECW title. The plan was for him to win, him and Punk feud, and then, but obviously things change. But like, you always have the what ifs. I saw a post the other day: what if Kurt Angle didn't leave in 2006? They showed all these WrestleMania matches he would have had. It was like The Rock, Shawn Michaels, all these guys that he would wrestle, then up to Cena at 35 or whatever the one he was supposed to wrestle Cena at. But yeah, there's always the what if factors, and that's the one thing about WWE that just keeps us on our toes, is the what if factor. What if Chris Jericho didn't leave to go on tour? What if Eddie didn't pass? What if Chris didn't do what he did? What if Kurt never left? What if Batista never left? Like, the what if factors in WWE, there's so many. It's fun to look on those what ifs too, because you can always look at the potential matchups. Like you said, Ray, how much more of a star would Ray have been if Eddie was still around?
Right, because like, Eddie was definitely the bigger star out of the two.
Right, or like you said, what if Eddie had won? What if Eddie was alive? Would he have won the Royal Rumble? Would Ray have eliminated him? Would they have gone? We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I do like that WrestleMania moment with Ray, because he goes in, wins, and then points up to the sky and has the title. And
because you could point to Eddie and Benoit in 2004. Those were two guys that people were super behind.
Yep.
Their road to WrestleManias. Benoit winning the Rumble, and then Eddie and his feud with Lesnar at No Way Out 2004. Bro, this is my addiction.
Yeah.
That promo before the pay-per-view.
Yeah, and it's like, and then you had, obviously, it led to Brock going after Goldberg at Mania, but which was a weird setup rivalry. I don't know, but there's also so many what if matches you could have talked about on Mania, and there's another time we can talk about, because we have plenty of time for Mania season.
I would love to do an episode
of
of
what
ifs,
because man, there's so many I can think of off the top of my head.
But in my head, I'm trying to draw a comparison because you got two guys right there in Eddie and Benoit within the framework of 2 years that died. What comparison could you draw that today? Two of your biggest workers and two of your biggest fan invested wrestlers, losing them from the roster.
Oh man, that's hard. Um, I mean, you could throw Bray in there because Bray'd come back and
That's fair.
he was gonna have this awesome run, but obviously we lost him pretty young. And then you could put him and I mean, you can even put Roman, Seth, Drew.
I'll put it out like this. Let's say maybe the comparison might be, what if you lose? Let's say you lost Sami Zayn,
Mm,
and I don't know if Seth Rollins is an accurate comparison. It's hard to play this, and we're getting into a little bit of a different
yeah.
territory. But do you think Seth Rollins is on the level of Eddie Guerrero?
No, and that's hard to say. I don't really know who's on the level of Eddie. I mean, it's hard to do. You can't really it's hard to put all these wrestlers in these categories. Yeah, you can put like heavyweights and whatever, but you can't really compare one person to another because they all have different wrestling styles. They all have
Right.
different backgrounds. Um, there's only one Randy Orton. Nobody can replace him. They tried to make another John Cena. It failed miserably. So, I mean,
With the comparison, though, I think I'm coming around to it, not because they're 1-to-1 in their style, but in terms of their impact. Because Eddie, given a little more time, there's very much a possibility that he could have had the success of a Rollins. Very
yeah,
much so. We live in a different era where Rollins has succeeded more because the style has changed.
yeah.
If Rollins was in Eddie's time period, he probably wouldn't have had as much success.
No,
I would say.
I don't think he would have. I think, I think in that time you had too many stars that Seth probably would. And I hate saying this because I like Seth, but he would have probably been a mid card guy. I don't think he would have ever been the main event kind of guy back in that day. Now, obviously, we're in 2025. Rollins has been here for 14 years at this point, so it's like he's become that main event superstar. Obviously, all three members of the Shield have become main event superstars. With Dean Ambrose going over being a mega star outside of WWE. So,
But you lose people who are on the verge of being superstars at that point. They hadn't quite reached it, but people who were also consistent main eventers, and you could build your brand off. That's what they were trying to do with Chris Benoit. They were trying to rebuild the ECW brand as this underground, what eventually NXT became.
yeah, and I mean, I obviously there's a lot that goes into that conversation with Chris. But and there's a whole documentary in that Vince's documentary. He talks about
Yeah.
it, and it's like there's more than just the chair shots had nothing to do with it.
But we're talking about it a little bit, so we'll pose that question for next week then.
No.
We'll look at you and enter your reactions. Not only for this episode, what wrestlers have you backed in the past for WrestleMania? Are you completely behind? And currently, which ones are you completely behind? Which wrestlers' road to WrestleMania are you looking to see to its completion? Whether that be Jey Uso of now, whether that be Charlotte Flair and her decision, we'll get to that. Or if that be WrestleMania's past, like Daniel Bryan and Kofi Kingston and Rey Mysterio, much like myself. But next week, we pose the question, what if? Biggest WrestleMania what ifs. I like that you brought it up because I think it's about time we bring that to everybody.
Yep.
There's so many we could talk about.
Oh yeah.
We're going to try to narrow it down for you guys. But biggest WrestleMania what ifs. If you had to think of one right now that you would like to talk about, do you got it in your head?
Yes.
Okay.
WrestleMania 26. What if we didn't have Shawn versus Taker 2? What if it was what I had read? It was supposed to be Miz, Shawn, Drew versus Taker.
Okay, we'll pause that and we'll get to it next week. That's a big what if right there. What if we didn't have Shawn versus Taker 2? A little bit of a sneak peek for next week. Thanks for joining us here on K.T.E. And we ask you, what if you didn't tune in to today's podcast? But we don't have to ask that.
Exactly.
Because this has been the K.T.E. Wrestling Podcast.